Have you ever felt a sudden pull, like something was trying to stop you? Picture this. You're about to walk out the door, and a strange calm holds you back. Not fear, not logic, just a feeling, an invisible pause, a whisper without words. And later, you realize that moment saved your life. What if the last thing you felt before everything changed was not panic, but a message? In today's story, you'll hear the true account of a mother named Clara. For 41 days, she sat by her daughter's hospital bed, frozen between two worlds. Her child, Isadora, just 17, was in a coma after a terrible accident. And every morning, Clara waited in silence, not for answers, but for something else. Then, one morning, something shifted. The light outside trembled, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, and in that sacred stillness, a sign came. A sign that no one could explain, but one that Clara felt with every fiber of her soul. This is not fiction. This is a true story of what some call coincidence, and others know as a divine signal, one of many real angel signs before tragedy. When something beyond this world steps in just before the unthinkable, a warning, a message, a whisper from the other side. And Clara listened. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. They had stopped giving her answers, not out of cruelty, but because there were none left to give. The body needs time, the doctors would say gently, with eyes that had already let go. But time had become her enemy. Isadora had once filled every corner of the house with music, laughter, and questions that didn't need answers. She was 17, old enough to dream of freedom, but still young enough to ask for her mother's approval. That morning, she had smiled before leaving, keys in hand. Clara remembered it clearly, a moment so normal it didn't even seem worth holding on to, and yet now it was the last unbroken moment of their lives. After the accident, the world shifted. The hospital became her new home, a place where the light never changed, where hope echoed against sterile walls and was slowly worn thin by silence. Machines breathed for Isadora. Tubes whispered where her voice once danced. And Clara sat there, hour after hour, her hands resting on a blanket that no longer felt like it belonged to anyone. She never blamed her daughter, but in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, she blamed herself. If I had said no, guilt crept in like fog, and faith, once her anchor, now felt like a story from someone else's life. She began to pray anyway, not with words, just silence, breath, presence. The kind of prayer that doesn't ask for miracles, only for peace. And that's when it started. The first time she thought it was nothing, a small white feather on the hospital pillow, weightless, soft. She brushed it away without thinking, assuming it came from a nurse's jacket or a blanket. But the next day, it was there again, and the day after that, sometimes by Isadora's hand, sometimes near her forehead, always after Clara closed her eyes and asked for strength, never out loud, but from somewhere deeper. The hospital didn't allow flowers or down pillows. Nothing in the room could explain it. One evening, as dusk painted the window with a faint golden blush, Clara sat watching her daughter sleep, or at least exist in that fragile state between life and memory. Her hands trembled as she held a worn photograph of the two of them at the beach, wind tangled in Isadora's hair, both laughing so fully it hurt to look at. She whispered, "Just show me something, anything." And then it happened again. No draft, no movement, just a feather. This time it didn't fall, it was placed, right by Isadora's temple, as if someone unseen had tucked it there with care. Clara froze. The world seemed to pause with her. The monitor still beeped, the air still hummed, but inside her, something opened. She didn't tell the nurses. Not yet. She didn't want to hear it was just static, or lint, or imagination, because she knew this was not random, this was not nothing. It became a ritual. At night, when the hospital quieted into that sacred kind of stillness only grief can create, Clara would sit and pray, eyes closed, hands gently resting. On her lap, no requests, no bargains, just presence, and always the feather. Some nights she wept, others she simply breathed, but slowly something began to shift in her. The guilt faded, even if the pain did not. The silence around her no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited. Was it Isadora's guardian? A sign from her own mother long gone? Or perhaps something even older? Some force that moves just beyond what science dares to name? One morning, as the sun spilled pale gold onto the tiled floor, Clara woke from a light sleep in the hospital chair. The nurse was adjusting Isadora's IV. Nothing had changed, except there was no feather. For the first time in 13 days, the pillow was bare. And that's when Clara heard it. Not a voice, but something deeper. A knowing, a feeling in her chest that made her stand without thinking and take her daughter's hand. Isadora's fingers twitched. It was slight, so slight the nurse didn't notice, but Clara did. She had felt it before she had seen it, like a ripple from far away, reaching her in time. Later, the doctors would call it unexpected responsiveness. They would begin to speak with cautious optimism. But Clara no longer needed their explanations. She had received hers, not in words, not in charts, but in feathers, in silence, in the unseen hands that placed a whisper on her daughter's pillow, again and again, just long enough to prepare her heart for what science couldn't promise. Even now, Clara doesn't try to explain it, but if you ever ask her what saved her, she will simply say, "Something was with us in that room, and it never left." Was it just coincidence? A pattern in grief? Or was it one of those quiet angel signs before tragedy? The kind that slips through when the world forgets how to listen. She still keeps the last feather, pressed between the pages of a prayer book she once thought she had stopped believing in. It was the 42nd night. A night like all the others, dim, quiet, heavy with waiting. The nurses passed like ghosts down the hallway, their footsteps soft against the polished floor. Machines whispered in rhythm. And Clara? Clara had stopped trying to stay awake. She rested her head on the edge of the hospital bed, her hand wrapped gently around Isadora's. The thin cotton sheet still smelled faintly of lavender disinfectant and warm linen, oddly comforting. The world outside didn't seem real anymore. Only this room existed now, this still place between hope and surrender. And then she dreamed, but not like before. This was no echo of memory, no confusion of the mind. This was different. In the dream there was light, but not the harsh white of fluorescent tubes. It was soft, golden, a late afternoon glow, like sunlight just before dusk. She stood in the middle of a lavender field, endless and swaying, the scent sweet and overwhelming. The sky above shimmered with a gentle gold, neither day nor night. And someone was walking, a girl, barefoot, calm, smiling at the breeze. Clara's breath caught. Even in the dream, her body reacted first, a wave of recognition, deep and undeniable. It was Isadora. She wasn't in hospital clothes. She wore a white dress, simple and flowing, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She moved like someone free from weight, every step a quiet song. But she wasn't alone. There was another presence beside her. Not a person, not exactly. It walked close, like a shadow wrapped in light, not blinding, but soft and warm, a gentle radiance that pulsed with peace. It had no face Clara could remember, only a feeling that wrapped around her like a blanket in winter. Calm, sacred, unshakable. She called out, or tried to. Her voice stayed locked in her chest. She began to run, desperate to reach them, but the ground beneath her feet turned soft like wet sand. Every step was a struggle. The lavender reached higher, pulling at her legs. Time felt stretched, like the dream didn't want her to catch up. And then, finally, she found her voice. Isadora. The girl stopped. Slowly she turned. Her face was full of light. Not the light of heaven, but something simpler, something familiar. She smiled. Clara tried to speak again, but the words trembled. She didn't want to wake up. She didn't want to let go. And then her daughter whispered, just loud enough for the words to carry through the dream. "Not yet, Mom. It's not time." That was all. The lavender swayed again. The sky faded, and Clara opened her eyes to the hum of machines and the quiet weight of dawn. The chair beneath her back ached. The sheet was creased where her head had rested. Her fingers still held her daughter's hand. But something had changed. Not outside, not visibly. Inside. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, blinking at the new light creeping through the window, and listening. Not for monitors, not for doctors, for something else. For the kind of voice that only speaks when the soul is quiet enough to hear. The kind that comes in dreams, wrapped in gold and lavender. The kind that reminds you are not alone. Was it just her mind searching for comfort? Or was it another one of those sacred angel signs before tragedy? A whispered promise from somewhere we can't see, telling her to wait just a little longer. She didn't have the answer. But that morning, for the first time in 42 days, Clara no longer feared the silence, because now the silence held a promise. Clara woke with tears already, in her eyes, not from a nightmare, but from something deeper, a weight in her chest she couldn't name. Her breath was uneven, her pulse quick, as if her body remembered something before her mind could catch up. The dream still lingered, like fog on a cold window, refusing to fully leave. Outside the hospital room, dawn was soft and grey, the kind that slips in quietly without asking permission. The hallway, usually so still in the early morning, carried a strange sound, faint, almost hidden. It was music. Not from a phone, not from one of the machines, but from an old radio someone had forgotten to turn off at the front desk. Clara stepped out and followed the melody, barely audible over the hum of the hospital. It floated down the corridor like a thread pulling her forward. The closer she got, the more her heart began to tremble. It was that song, a lullaby from long ago, gentle, slow, with words that barely mattered. Isadora used to hum it in the backseat of the car, head against the window, eyes half closed as the world passed by. Clara hadn't heard it in years, not in this place, not in this lifetime. She stood frozen, her knees weakened. That soft melody felt too personal to be chance. And then something happened, a sensation, a thought, but not quite her own. It didn't come as a voice in her ear. It didn't echo like a dream. It arrived in her chest, a knowing, gentle, quiet, but undeniable. Stay late today. The words weren't hers, but they were inside her, clear, precise, calm. She blinked, shook her head, tried to reason it away, but the message stayed, like an invisible hand placed lightly on her shoulder. So, she stayed. That day, when visiting hours ended and families drifted out into the night air, Clara remained in the chair by Isadora's bed. The nurses didn't question it. They had come to know her silence. One brought her tea, another dimmed the lights. By 10 p.m., the hallway was nearly dark. A soft hush had fallen across the ward, the kind that feels sacred. Machines blinked gently, curtains swayed as if moved by breathless prayers, and Clara waited. She didn't know what for, she just knew she couldn't leave. She sat in stillness, one hand on Isadora's blanket, the other pressed over her own heart, listening, breathing, holding space for something that had no name. And in that space, hope returned. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. She thought of the song again, of the feather, of the dream, of the whisper that told her to stay. Without fear, without question. Was it just emotion? Was she so deep in grief that her mind had created a pattern? Or was it one of those rare, sacred angel signs before tragedy? A voice not heard but felt, guiding her to the very place she needed to be. Clara couldn't answer. She didn't need to, because in that quiet room, with her daughter sleeping and the world paused outside, something sacred was happening, something science wouldn't see. But she did, and she stayed. It was nearly 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world feels thinner, when even the shadows seem to sleep. Clara hadn't meant to stay awake. Her body was exhausted, but something inside her refused to close its eyes. The silence in the hospital room was complete. No footsteps, no voices, only the soft rhythm of the machines beside the bed. And then it changed. A sound, barely there, but enough to make her sit upright, not mechanical, not artificial, real. A breath, soft, rhythmic, human. She froze, heart racing, mind refusing to believe. She leaned in, afraid to move too fast and scare the moment away. And there, in the quiet, she saw it. A hand, Isadora's hand. Fingers twitching, just barely, but moving. Clara's breath caught. She reached for the call button but stopped, because something deeper pulled her closer. Then, the smallest shift. Isadora's lips parted, not in sleep, not in reflex, as if trying to speak. A sound escaped, not a word, not yet, but something alive. Clara moved, slowly, tears already breaking loose, her legs barely holding her weight as she stepped toward the bed. She whispered her daughter's name, afraid it might dissolve the moment. Isadora. And then, eyes. Those eyes she knew better than her own reflection, opening slowly, deep, still, not afraid, not confused, just present, alive. They locked onto hers, and in that gaze, Clara saw everything. The 17 years they had shared, the days they had lost, the prayers that had gone unanswered, until now. No alarms rang, no miracle music played, just silence and breath, and love so strong it brought the world to a stop. She fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching her daughter's hand, as if trying to keep the moment from slipping away. Tears ran freely now, not from grief, but from a wordless gratitude that wrapped itself around her like a second skin. She didn't ask how, she didn't need to know, because in her heart she already understood. This was the moment the signs had pointed to. The feather, the dream, the whisper, the song, all leading here to this breath, to these eyes. Was it healing? Was it luck? Was it timing? Or was it something greater? One of those rare angel signs before tragedy, where unseen hands hold open the veil just long enough to remind us you are not forgotten, you are not alone. And sometimes, when all hope seems lost, the soul finds its way back. Clara whispered, "I'm here," over and over, as if afraid the moment might vanish. But it didn't, because time, for one sacred heartbeat, had stopped, and something divine had stepped in. The hospital began to whisper the word no one had dared say out loud: miracle. Doctors spoke in cautious tones, as if reluctant to believe their own observations. "She's recovering rapidly, remarkably. Unusual neural response. A case for the books." But Clara didn't need their explanations. She had seen it coming, not with her eyes, but with her soul. Isadora, though weak, grew stronger with each passing hour. The color returned to her cheeks. Her hands, once limp, now gripped Clara's gently. The girl who had once floated on the edge of life was returning, not just in body, but in presence. And yet, something unspoken lingered between them. A quiet knowing, like the final piece of a puzzle neither of them could place. Until Isadora spoke. It was the third morning after she woke. Sunlight spilled across the sheets, warm and golden, casting soft shadows on the walls. A nurse had just finished checking her vitals when Isadora turned her head and whispered, "Can I talk to my mom, alone?" They cleared the room. Even the nurse paused, as if sensing the weight in her voice. Clara pulled the chair closer, heart already pounding. Isadora looked at her for a long moment, not with fear, but with a kind of fragile strength. And then, in a voice barely more than a breath, she said, "I knew you were there. Every day. Even when I couldn't move. I felt you." Clara tried to speak, but no words came. Isadora continued, her gaze steady. "But you weren't the only one." Clara frowned, unsure what she meant. "There was someone else," Isadora whispered, "at the foot of the bed. A man. But not really. More like a light, shaped like a person. I couldn't see his face, but he was always there, especially when the pain came." Clara's eyes widened. Isadora's lips trembled slightly, but she kept going. "He spoke to me, not in words like ours, more like thoughts that went straight into my heart." Clara took her daughter's hand and held it tight. "What did he say?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Isadora closed her eyes for a moment, as if reaching back into that in-between place where she had lived for so long. "He said, you needed me, that you were breaking, that it wasn't time yet, and then he said something I'll never forget." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "He said, you must go back, not just for you, but for her." The room fell into a hush so deep, even the machines seemed to quiet. Clara pressed her hand to her chest, trying to hold together everything that had just been broken open. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not science, not timelines, not logic, because this wasn't about charts or odds. It was about a voice in the dark, a presence in the silence, a message that came when no one else could reach her. Was it the same voice that had told Clara to stay late? The same one that placed feathers on the pillow? The one wrapped in light, beside her daughter in that lavender dream? She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Some truths don't need explanation, only reverence. And deep down she knew this was one of those rare and sacred angel signs before tragedy, the kind that comes when the soul is fading, but love refuses to let go, the kind that brings someone back, not just to survive, but to return with a message. They spoke in quiet moments now, not out of fear, but reverence. Isadora no longer rushed her words. She chose them, with care, like someone carrying something too delicate to drop. And Clara listened like she never had before, not just with ears, but with every part of her being. One evening, as soft rain tapped against the hospital window and the sky outside settled into a muted grey, Isadora turned to her mother and said, "I need to tell you more about him." Clara leaned in, her breath held. He wasn't bright like the sun. His light didn't shine. It rested, soft, warm, like when you're wrapped in a blanket as a child. Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with something else, awe. His eyes didn't glow, she continued, but when I looked into them, I stopped being afraid. They didn't promise anything. They didn't need to. They just calmed me. Clara's heart pressed hard against her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. Isadora looked down at her own hands, now thinner but alive. Her fingers touched the place where the IV line entered, as if remembering something that wasn't. Entirely gone. There were moments when I felt like I was slipping, like I wasn't part of my body anymore, and every time I thought I couldn't hold on, he touched my hand. She lifted her eyes. Not hard, just enough, just right. Clara could barely breathe. She could see the weight of what her daughter carried, not just memories but messages, warnings, promises, and something she hadn't spoken of yet. There was a bridge, Isadora whispered, covered in mist. I don't know where it led, but I felt drawn to it, like it was the way out. It was quiet there, too quiet. I didn't feel pain, but I didn't feel love either. Only distance. Clara held her breath. She didn't dare interrupt. And that's when he came close, Isadora said. Closer than before. I didn't even have to ask. He just knew I was ready to let go. And then he said... She paused, swallowing emotion. You still haven't finished teaching love. Tears slipped silently down Clara's face. I didn't understand it, Isadora whispered. But I felt it in every part of me, that I still had something left to give, something unfinished. Then her fingers gently pressed her chest right over her heart. And then I felt this push. Not hard, not frightening, just a warm breath, like someone was blowing softly into me. Not air, something deeper, like spirit. Her voice fell into silence, and then she smiled, faint but real. I woke up right after that, and when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was you. Clara couldn't speak. She only reached out, pulling her daughter's hand to her lips and holding it there. The moment hung between them like light through fog, still, sacred, unforgettable. She had no way to explain what had happened, but there was no part of her that doubted it. The bridge, the hand, the whisper, the breath of light. This wasn't a hallucination. It was a message wrapped in mystery, a divine interruption. One of those angel signs before tragedy, when something unseen holds a soul, just long enough to remind it of its purpose, and then sends it home. Not every healing comes from medicine. Some come in the form of words spoken beyond this world, words that don't just rescue the body, but restore the heart. That afternoon, for the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself to go home, just for a short while. A hot shower, fresh clothes, a moment to feel human again. The house was quiet, untouched, like a memory left behind. But even as warm water ran over her skin, her thoughts remained in that hospital room, with Isadora, with the miracle she had no words for. By the time she returned, the sun was low, casting long beams of light through the hallway windows. The hospital smelled like alcohol wipes and clean linens, oddly comforting, oddly sacred. When she stepped into the room, it was empty. No nurses, no visitors, no sound, just stillness. And then she saw it. Her breath stopped mid-inhale. There, resting perfectly on Isadora's pillow, was a feather. White, small, weightless. Exactly like the ones she had seen before. Her knees gave in before her thoughts could catch up, and she sank slowly to the floor. A silence filled the room. Not hollow, but heavy with something unseen. It felt like the air had changed, like time had slowed just for her to witness this moment. She stared at the feather. It hadn't fallen, it hadn't drifted in. It had been placed, carefully, purposefully, as if left by someone who knew exactly what it meant. No windows were open, no pillows had feathers inside, no one had entered, and yet it was there. Clara reached out with trembling fingers, her hands unsure whether they were worthy to touch it. When she lifted it gently from the fabric, the feather seemed to weigh more than it should, not in mass, but in meaning, as if it carried every prayer, every silence, every tear from the past 40 days, as if this single delicate thing held the entire mystery of what had just unfolded. She held it close, not to examine it, but to feel it. It was soft, almost warm. Her fingers trembled, and she whispered through tears, "You were here." It wasn't the feather that broke her. It was what it confirmed, that the signs had been real, that every whisper, every dream, every flicker of hope was not imagined. Something had watched over her daughter, and over her, whether it was an angel, a guardian, or something even older. It had stayed until the very end, and maybe it was still there, just out of sight, but closer than breath. Clara didn't tell the doctors. She didn't need to. This wasn't for them. It was a message not meant for explanation, only for the heart. Another angel sign before tragedy. But this time, it arrived not to warn, but to reassure. To say, "It's over now. She's safe. You listened, you stayed, and you were never alone." She placed the feather inside her purse like a sacred relic, a reminder of the invisible thread that had carried them both across the darkest days of their lives. And as the machines hummed quietly behind her, and her daughter slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Clara closed her eyes and whispered her own quiet thank you into the silence. Isadora's recovery didn't follow any chart. The doctors stopped trying to explain it after a while. Her strength returned faster than expected, walking, talking, smiling, all in days, not weeks. The nurses gave her a nickname, the girl with the quiet smile. And she did smile. Not the same way she used to, but softer, deeper, like someone who had seen something sacred and chosen to carry it gently. But Clara noticed something else, something no medical record could hold. Isadora had changed. She began to write letters, not to friends, not to family, to strangers, names she didn't know, patients she'd never met. The nurses found her notes slipped under doors, beside beds, in empty waiting rooms, words like, "You are not alone. I know it's hard to believe, but someone is with you. Don't give up. Light is closer than it feels." Sometimes she left flowers, wild ones she asked the staff to bring in, always in rooms where someone was struggling, always without being asked. Clara asked her once gently, "How do you know who needs them?" Isadora smiled, that same quiet smile. "I just feel it," she said. "It's like something pulls me, like they're calling out, without knowing." She never claimed to hear voices, never described visions, but she always knew where to go. And each time she left a letter or a flower behind, something inside Clara stirred, the same feeling she had when feathers appeared, when dreams brought light, when time itself seemed to pause. Clara's own faith, once broken by silence and sorrow, began to return. But it was not the same faith she had carried before. It was quieter now, not built on sermons or rules, not desperate for answers. It was rooted in stillness, in signs that could not be explained, in moments that asked for nothing, but gave everything. She stopped trying to understand how or why. Instead, she learned to say thank you for the whisper, for the presence, for the hand that pulled her back when she had nothing left to hold on to. There is something, she now believed, something that walks beside us when the road disappears, something that holds us when we can no longer hold ourselves. And though she may never know its name, she knows its signs, because she's seen them. In a dream, in a feather, in the stillness of a room just before dawn, and in the smile of a girl who came back, not just healed, but transformed. Between faith and mystery, Clara found her answer, not in proof, but in peace. And deep in her soul, she now carried the quiet truth. There is something that watches over us, even in the darkest hour, especially then. Years have passed now. Seasons have changed. Birthdays have been celebrated. And the hospital room that once held so much pain has long been left behind. But for Clara, some moments never fade. Not with time, not with distance. Beside her bed in a small wooden box lined with velvet, she keeps the feather. White, fragile, untouched by the years. A reminder not of the pain, but of what waited just beyond it. She still reaches for it on certain nights, not to hold, but to remember. Not just what happened, but what was given. Isadora, now grown, walks the sterile halls of a different hospital. Only now, she's the one standing beside the beds, the one placing flowers where there is fear, the one holding hands when families are too tired to speak. She became a nurse, not because of what happened to her, but because of what she carried back. When people ask her about that time, about the coma, the dream, the man of light, she doesn't give long answers. She just smiles, the same quiet smile that once made nurses call her the girl with the calm eyes. And sometimes, softly, she'll say, "I didn't come back. He brought me back." The rest she leaves unspoken, because the truth she carries can't always be told with words. Their story is shared now in hushed voices, in small churches, in hospital chapels, in quiet gatherings of faith. People pass it on not like a tale, but like a sacred truth, as if something in it touches the part of us we rarely speak about, but always feel. But for Clara, it isn't a story at all. It's the day the world stopped moving, the day pain stepped aside and silence became sacred, the day an angel stood, unseen, at the foot of her daughter's bed, waiting, patient, present, not demanding belief, just there. And perhaps that's what makes this story live on. It didn't ask for attention. It didn't arrive with thunder or fire. It came quietly, in feathers, in whispers, in the smallest shift of breath. And it stayed just long enough to change everything. Whatever you choose to believe, whether you call it chance, spirit, grace, or something we don't yet have words for, one thing is clear. Some moments are too perfect to explain, too gentle to be forced, too true to be forgotten. And sometimes they come to us when we're at our weakest, not to answer questions, but to hold us while we ask them. Have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence or something divine? What would you have done if this happened to you? Do you think angels are trying to guide us, even when we don't notice? If your heart is whispering yes, even just a little, then maybe you're already listening. And if this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers, just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.